Alright, so throughout all human history, it's been our DNA to explore and experience new things. So I think next up on the list should be Mars. Now the question I'm trying to answer today is, should we colonize Mars and how would we do it? But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about Mars. So Mars' atmosphere is made up of about 96% carbon dioxide and only 0.02% oxygen. Now to compare that to Earth, here on Earth we have about 21% oxygen. So the oxygen levels are completely different. Scientists used to believe that there used to be life on Mars. This could be including like bacteria, microbes. It wouldn't be intelligent life like you and I, but there was some evidence of life. Also, scientists believe that there was running water on Mars. And this will get very important later. So Mars is the fourth planet in our solar system. It is the planet to the right of Earth. And one reason we're so interested in Mars is because in between Mars and Jupiter lays the asteroid belt. And it's a highway of just asteroids. This is important because scientists can then start to research asteroids, where they come from, and also most asteroids are made up of platinum and titanium. So eventually, if we would have a self-sustaining colony on Mars, we'd be able to mine asteroids and get those resources, and then have an export from Mars to Earth and get funding from Mars. So now let's start to answer our question. So how would we colonize Mars? Well, we need to think of the four things we need to survive on Earth with. We need shelter, we need food, we need water, and we need air. So let's talk about shelter first. So shelter is very interesting because NASA has produced a prototype of a shelter called the inflatable bubble. It's very interesting because Mars has no magnetic field, so that means there's harmful solar radiation, and we don't know what that does yet to the human body. So these inflatable bubbles are insulated enough where they can protect us from that harmful solar radiation. Another key element to Mars is Mars' surface is made up of it's made up of iron oxide, which is essentially rust. So what we can do with that iron oxide is we can take that and we can layer it on top of the inflatable bubble, and this will insulate us even more. So that's how we have shelter on Mars. Now let's talk about food. So food is also a key element to Mars because it needs to be self-sustaining. We have to have a self-sustaining colony, so we have to be able to grow food on Mars. Well, you're thinking, how do we grow food on a barren wasteland? Well, so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to branch out on our inflatable bubble a little food pod, it's called, and on this we would grow things like potatoes, tomatoes, rye, wheat, radishes, and green beans and peas. Because recently NASA just made a breakthrough in discovery where they took Martian soil and were able to grow these plants in that soil. So that way we have a renewable resource of food on Mars. Now, obviously it takes time for these plants to grow. So the first settlers on Mars are going to have some sort of cargo ship of dehydrated food. So that way the food lasts for them and gives time for these plants to grow. Another key element to growing food is we're going to have to grow them in ultraviolet light because we can't just put food outside because, well, it would die. So next, everything needs water. This includes plant life, any sort of life. So, like I said earlier in the beginning, scientists believe that there used to be running water on Mars. And what happened to that running water is, over time, since Mars has no magnetic field, the solar winds and solar radiation pushed off those water particles off Mars. It's almost the same as if you put your hands and you're washing your hands, and then you go to the air dryer and then push, and all the water just gets pushed off. That's essentially what happened to Mars. But they basically made a breakthrough discovery where they found ice deposits. Now this ice isn't like ice here on Earth. It's frozen water vapor. So what happens is when you heat that water vapor up, it comes in the form of steam. So how do we get it to a liquid water? Well, NASA's made a machine called the water extractor. If you look down here, right here's a pipe, and this pipe goes straight down in that ice deposit, and it heats up as it drills down. So over time, this will heat up the water vapor. The water vapor will get sucked up that pipe. It'll go through the machine and then into this little bubble thing here. And that bubble thing is called the moisture evaporator. That takes that water vapor and it turns it into liquid water. So over time, we're going to start having an abundance of liquid water on Mars. So then, lastly, we need to breathe on Mars. Well, we can't just go outside like we are standing right here, right now. Because obviously, there is no oxygen on Mars, like I said earlier. So when the settlers go outside, they're going to have to wear some form of spacesuit. But while they're in their inflatable bubble, NASA has made a machine called a MOXIE. Now this MOXIE is like an artificial tree. It essentially takes all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and starts slowly converting it into oxygen. This is also a very big discovery because we could also do this in the middle of space if we wanted to. Now the MOXIE isn't very big. This is the rover, and right here is the actual MOXIE. This was in 2018. This is when they discovered that they could use the MOXIE on Mars. So we answered how we colonize Mars. So let's answer, should we colonize Mars? Well, like I said earlier, humans have been exploring the Earth throughout all of history. So this would be a major breakthrough. If we can find out that there was life on Mars, it would answer that curious question we always ask. Is there more life out there? Now let's also think, what would happen if the Earth would suddenly explode? Now obviously, everyone would die, and that would be a tragic happening. So, it would be the end of the human species as we know it, the end of everything we ever knew. So if we had people on Mars, over time, we would have backups of the human species, and we'd leave evidence of the human species. We just want to leave a footprint in the universe. And I think Mars is just the beginning of how we go further and deeper into the universe.